This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. Joining me today as my guest. Oh, wait a little second. Have I got any echo coming back on it? I can take that bit out. No, that's fine. Don't know, just my end, it was fine. I was just double checking something. Cool.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and joining me today on the show, my guest is a political activist, a creative director with 20 years of experience, and the executive director of the newly established UAP Disclosure Fund. I've got Yuan Fung. Yuan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andy. It's an honor to be here. I enjoy your podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Good to have you on. And I was just saying to you, Anne, that you've not done many interviews. You've been on with Matt Ford on the Good Trouble Show. You've just told me you've done a Twitter space on the day of the launch of the UAP Disclosure Fund, and you've been interviewed by Chris Sharp of the Liberation Times. So there won't be too many folks, if they've not seen any of those, outside of that will be familiar with you. But that's why we're here, get you on to chat to you and find out a little bit more about you, the UAP Disclosure Fund, and kind of what's brought you to the dance. So let's start with Yuan first. Who are you, for those who aren't familiar?
Yeah, I know. I came out of nowhere into this space, and so my background, like you said, I've been working in campaign politics for over 2 decades, primarily as a creative director at a consulting firm, and we've worked on the races of over 50 members of Congress, 34 senators, including the late, great Harry Reid, who everybody in this topic knows was so integral in where we are today with the topic. And so, I'm hoping to bring those, my skill and my experience in campaign politics to bear on the UAP topic. Last year when things were getting more political, we had the hearings in Congress. We had the UAP Disclosure Act, 1.0. That's when I, as somebody who'd been interested in the topic for several years now, really started to feel like it was time to leverage all this public interest into more of a political grassroots movement and start to apply political pressure and support for the lawmakers in Congress. I like to say I'm part of the wave of 2017. Like so many, saw the New York Times article and the FLIR videos, and that was a light bulb moment for me. So I've been following the topic closely since then. When I was a kid, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was my favorite movie. I had a Close Encounters of the Third Kind sleeping bag.
Nice.
So yeah, that's my background.
So you quite rightly say you got on board 2017. Many folks listening and watching this were either lapsed folks with an interest in UFOs, ufology, whatever you want to call it, who got back involved or back interested then. Some folks were new to the topic from then on. But if I met you on 2015 and it was a business lunch one day and you're networking and speaking to folks, and I bumped into you and got talking about UFOs, and you were talking 2 years before 2017 here, and I said to you, I'm really into UFOs. What was your stance on the topic then?
I've always been open-minded and frankly hopeful that what has been reported over so many decades and throughout history has been real. I just think it's fascinating. So I've always loved to talk about it, but it's one of those topics that for me it wouldn't come up that often. As with so many people, it's only been in the recent past that it's become much more widestream when you talk to people. Friends and family and coworkers.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the UAP Disclosure Fund then. It's got its own site, its own channel, own Twitter feed. All those links will be in the description if folks haven't seen it already. But tell us the basics. What is the UAP Disclosure Fund? And then take us back even further to when that seed was planted and how it all came about.
Sure. The UAP Disclosure Fund is a nonpartisan, nonprofit entity, and we are advocating for greater government transparency regarding UAP. And we're going to be doing that by working with Congress directly, working to build a grassroots movement of people who support UAP legislation and transparency. and promoting scientific research. And as the occasion arises, we want to be able to support UAP whistleblowers too. Like I said before, the genesis of this project came last year when I became convinced that it was time to do something that was a little bit more than was happening in the space in terms of political action. And I reached out to Lou Elizondo, and we immediately started discussing the idea. He liked it. And so in the beginning, it was a collaboration of us, brainstorming and thinking about what that would look like. And then I was able to start meeting other folks and meeting people in the field. And so over the following several months, it was a lot for me. It was a lot of networking and meeting people. I met, Gary Nolan and Chris Mellon, eventually Carl Nell, and inviting people to become part of the project. And we have this joke that we've assembled the Avengers board, and we like to call them that. And I think that the reason that all of these individuals agreed and wanted to be part of this project is because they too saw the need for increased political action. And that's really, what we're going to be focused on in the near future. And what, there's so many aspects to the UAP topic, and there's lots of, different lanes that nonprofits and other organizations can operate in. And we feel that we have, a good lane. We're going to be hyper focused on activism within the U.S. government right now, because I do believe that is one step of many towards our greater understanding of the phenomenon.
So right now, you mentioned some of those names. I'll go through the list as it's written on the website. Okay, so we've got the board of directors, will be very familiar names to those in the UFO topic. Louise Elizondo, Gary Nolan, and Carl Nell. The advisory board of Chris Mellon and Kirk McConnell. Executive director is yourself, Yuan Fung. We've got Director of Strategy, Matt Ford, as many will know from the Good Trouble show, and Chief Financial Officer, Leslie Duckworth. So you've got a relatively small team there. Right now, though, what does the day-to-day or week-to-week running of the UAP Disclosure Fund look like?
Certainly. In addition to who we've posted as our core team on the website, we've got a number of other people who have come to the project over the last couple of months. And so we're formulating our plans for advocating for the UAP Disclosure Act over the next few months. Mm-hmm. And we've got volunteers who are coming to us wanting to help. And so we're trying to, organizationally, we're building the plane as it flies right now. And right now we've got a staff of about 6 people who are volunteering their time. And so we're working on the next steps. We're going to have a website refresh uploaded soon. And then we're going to look at our first campaigns for messaging to Congress directly, messaging to the public, and figure out how we can best advocate moving forward.
You mentioned first campaigns. You've sort of had your first real call to action, where immediately there was a petition on the site. I shared that, as many others had, and signed it, looking for 10,000 signatures to hand over to Congress to show support for the UAP legislation that is hopefully going to be going through in the NDAA. That hopefully will be added any day now. I think historically, a few folks that are talking to me expect it to be in Monday or Tuesday of next week, potentially. So if people look out for that, that's not a given, but look for about then. Even with it being added in, there's still, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it has to go through the Senate first, then the House, or is it other way around?
That's correct. The House has already submitted their version, and now the Senate is working on their version. So we're hoping and expecting that the UAP Disclosure Act for 2024 will be added as a floor amendment in the next few days here, and then the Senate will eventually vote on it. Last year, it passed unanimously with the UAPDA in there, and then usually it's in December at the very end of the year when finally the House and the Senate have to reconcile their 2 different versions, and then it gets voted on then. So we have a handful of thresholds coming up where messaging and making those in Congress who are working on this aware that the public really supports legislation are going to be important. And like I said, we're planning on doing not only advocacy directly with members of Congress, but also targeting, Congress online with targeted messaging campaigns as well.
Let's talk about the 10,000. Why was that number important, and what was the significance of getting 10,000? What then happened?
Yeah, I mean, we came out of the gate with that we realized there was a need to take action pretty quickly at the beginning of June to just really start to build support for the addition of UAP legislation in the NDAA for this year. And, we figured 10,000 would be a goal that we could reach. And it's, we're very excited. We've received over 10,000 signatures and from over 60 countries. The majority of the signers were from the United States, and then the second most were from the UK. So it's obviously a global issue, and we're very heartened by the response and the support from all over the world. Really, it's a global issue, and I think showing that to U.S. lawmakers that the United States citizens take it seriously, and as does the rest of the world, is important. And so we've turned in the petition, and I was recently in D.C. and submitted the petition to the various offices. We were informed that Senator Schumer was shown the petition and was very appreciative of the support. So that was mission accomplished right there. And Senator Rounds, I think, is in the same position. And so we've wrapped that up, and now we're going to look towards the next our next plan.
It's very much in its infancy, the UAP Disclosure Fund. It's in its formative months.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something that came right out the bat, looking for the petition. Now, you've said, Rounds were very appreciative. You guys, it was a goal you thought you could reach, and you got there. I saw frustration from your average Joe like myself, who people struggled to work out why it took so long to reach 10,000, because for them, there were people with 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 followers. Loyal Elizondo's got over 100,000, I think, now. And you would automatically think, and maybe this isn't how, and I've said this before, social media isn't real life. So just because someone has 1 million followers doesn't mean 1 million people see everything they put out there. That's not how it works, So did you have any frustration in the time it took to get 10,000, or was it something you sort of expected, and is that something that you expect to grow as the steps go along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that people don't necessarily realize how difficult it is, or it can be, to get people to take that extra step of going from looking at a feed and taking in information and something they're interested in to actually taking the 1 minute or 2 minutes it takes to click on a link and put your name in a petition and hit submit. And so this was a perfect example of the challenge of activism, political activism. I'm confident that we can, moving forward, we can put more resources into promoting any future political actions, so they'll reach an even wider audience. So yeah, I mean, I was hopeful as we launched that we might get 20,000, 30,000 signatures within a couple of weeks. So it was a reminder to me as well that political action is another step from just consuming content. And we're in a position, I think, with this topic where obviously the public interest has grown over the last several years, and it's significant. And so I think that's why it's so important for organizations like ours now to come to the space and start to educate people about how important it is to take action, so that we can know that the efforts that we put into it are going to show results and, basically support Congress in what they're doing.
Yeah, it's very true that every single click or step along the way, filling in a form or anything like that, you lose folks. And that's why Apple's so successful in getting folks to sign up or pay for stuff, because it's double click, you've paid for something, you've filled in a form, it's done. Whereas, for example, just for this podcast, if someone wants to sign up to the premium version, quick plug for myself, they can do it on Apple with a double click, done. If you want to do it on Spotify, you have to search for a separate feed, that UFO Podcast Premium. You click on a link, you then fill in a form, you have to then fill in your payment details, and then you click submit. Every single step along the way, you lose people. So something even as important as this, where so many folks, no doubt listening to this right now, would go, yeah, I would fill that in. But the actual percentage of folks that make it just to get into the form, to then get their way through a form, any form of that kind, you lose folks along the way. So like you say, for anyone who does think it's easy, it's not, just to get folks to finish that process. So that's not just an issue for the UAP DF. That's an issue just with
Certainly.
life in general. The fewer clicks, the fewer links, the better for anyone to get to an endpoint. I want to ask, short, medium, long term, what's the plan for the UAP Disclosure Fund?
Yeah, so like I said before, short term, we are advocating for the UAP Disclosure Act, and we're looking at potentially supporting lawmakers or members of Congress or candidates who might need some support in the upcoming election. That's a possibility. And then we're also, going to be advocating and supporting any whistleblower legislation that comes out as presented moving forward. And the UAP Disclosure Act is not the end to get us to our end goal. It's not. It's a huge step forward, but one of the things that we're looking at, as we think about how to approach the next coming months and years, is that there are going to be multiple phases. Right now, phase one is building the momentum within the Senate and Congress to continue to take action and getting the UAP DA passed and building public support. And then if it can get passed, the review board will be established, and there's going to be a need to have our voices heard to make recommendations for who should be on that board. And the act specifically mentions nonprofits will be able to participate in that process. So we plan on being a part of that process and looking to see who we could recommend. These will be, Nobel level candidates that would be on the review board. And, after that, if whistleblower protections are enacted, then I think the important thing at that point will be to bring as many people forward from the shadows to testify and to tell the truth about what they've learned and how they've been involved in potentially secret programs over the years. And we have to institutionalize that process so that it makes it easier for whistleblowers to come forward en masse. And I myself and those of us on the board think that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission down the road would be a very good step to untangle this mess that's festered within our government for all these decades. So that's the strategic overview of how we see this unfolding over the next coming months and years. And so we're going to be, advocating for what's needed every step of the way. And another significant goal of ours is I want to quadruple the number of people in the United States and elsewhere that are aware of this topic. It's been growing, but it's still just a very small percentage of the population that's actually tracking the topic and is aware of the basic facts. And so we think that putting resources into public awareness campaigns where we can onboard people to the topic and get them interested is a huge part of how we keep things moving in the right direction. So that'll be a focus moving forward as well.
Absolutely. No, I can appreciate that. When people see the word fund, there's a lot of groups popping up, okay? So whenever someone asks for money, for example, I had the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance came up last year. Are you aware of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I wouldn't ask your opinion on it, because either way, that's, you might think negatively or positively, but regardless, it's another group that came up, and essentially you've got a whole load of folks who are either UFO activists or actors, and the idea is to use that networking space and influence and potentially funding to grow the interest in the UFO topic. And I had all kinds of reaction and response to, and I had some folks on from that as to what people think of that, okay? You look at the UAP Disclosure Fund, and similar idea in terms of it's a group. There is an option to donate. There is the word fund in there. However, I'll say I think a lot of folks will like the look of the names on the board. I think many listening to this will. Some won't, but that's just the nature of the beast. But when you see the word fund, it gets people's red flags going up. So let me ask, for example, you reach a goal of, say, $100,000 in the UAP Disclosure Fund bank. what would the plan be with that money? And in layman's terms, for me, I'm thinking, okay, if they're going to really focus on whistleblowers, for example, here, I know you
Mhm.
touched on a few things there, campaign support and such, but I'm thinking 40 David Grushes come forward. They don't all have bank balances into the hundreds and, millions basically of dollars to defend themselves up against what they're going to need. The legal expertise is the plan to then you take that funding and that can be offered to provide that level of support.
Yes. Going back a step, one of the reasons that we came up with the name UAP Disclosure Fund and included that word is because it's an organization where we want to be able to react to what is needed at any particular time as the topic unfolds and as things move forward. So one month or one season, it might be political action, and then another period it might be support of whistleblowers. It might be public awareness.
Mhm.
So really, we're a fund. We're a nonprofit fund. There's no. I understand the word fund can. A lot of people think of it as investment fund, right? Where people
Sure.
are trying to make money and profit off of it. The UAP Disclosure Fund is not that whatsoever. We're a nonprofit. And so we want to be a fund where people know that they can contribute to the cause and we can spend those resources where they're most needed at any given time. And we're going to be very transparent about where we're putting the money and how we're spending it so that people understand exactly where their support is going.
Obviously, you've got your everyday person like myself, like people listening to this or watching this right now who will be looking, potentially thinking, it's a tough time for everyone. We've heard that now for a lot of years, okay? Any penny's a prisoner, if you want to call it that. But someone says, I'm going to throw $5, $10 in there. Anything I'm sure is appreciated. Is the bigger picture, though, to attract bigger donors, folks who maybe do have healthier bank balances, not just to
Yeah.
supplement it, but folks to say, I can give you $50,000, $100,000. Is that the plan?
Yes, absolutely. Impact has, scale has a lot to do with impact. So we've launched as a grassroots effort, and all of the support from the public for our petition and the donations we've received so far is pure grassroots political activism. And we came out of the gate doing that. But we're in the process now of seeking additional funding, larger dollar donors, and knowing that if we can demonstrate that we can create impact in various areas where it's needed, we can attract larger donations as well. So that's our vision, and our goal is to be able to scale this up to a significant size. I mean, a perfect example would be, what if we could do a Super Bowl ad about UAP and about what's happening? We know that's $7 million to run a 30-second ad during the American Super Bowl. That would be the perfect example of, we could be positioned to do that as an entity, as a group. If somebody with very deep pockets thought, you know what, I want to do that. So that to me, that's the ultimate example of things can scale up very quickly based on who's interested in supporting the cause and how much they're willing to support it financially.
If I've got any listeners who win a Powerball over in the US, as it's called, with a $500 million jackpot, then I'm sure $7 million to the UAP DF wouldn't go amiss. You can support me on Patreon first, of course, and then deal with those guys. But I think, though, you've got one foot in the door, because to use an example, if I was starting a podcast on UFOs today, grassroots, because I literally started this, well, I still do this as a nobody, right? But I started with, no one knew who I was. No one knew how to listen, what to listen to. I just recorded and put it out there to see if someone would listen. And people did, which is great. But you're starting from zero. Whereas you're coming out the gate doing a UFO podcast, let's say, with Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and Gary Nolan on every week. Now, that's a hell of a team to have behind you straight away. So have you managed to attract any of those at least bigger conversation donors so far?
Yeah, I mean, I can share that conversations are in process, and we are confident that the financial world is looking over at the UAP topic, and hedge fund managers and other people from that high end of the financial world, and they're tracking the UAP topic. Some of them, it's still a small percentage of that world, but I think that there's no shortage of interest in the events that have been unfolding and where this is headed. So we are very confident that interest and the level of people who could potentially support the cause, there's no shortage of opportunity.
I want to get to some listener questions that folks have sent in, but I've got one more question for you from me first. At UAP DF is the X or Twitter handle, as people still call it. The only account that it follows, and I'm presuming it's you that operates it, is SpaceX. Now, what's the reason behind that?
It's a great question. It's the default. You have to, I believe an account has to follow at least one account.
Yeah.
And so we launched the X Twitter account, and we've decided so far not to follow anybody really. We're just using it as our messaging platform right now. To be honest with you, I figured if we started following people would read into that, and there'd be all sorts of speculation about why we followed, one person and not another. So rather than get into that, the default is SpaceX.
And if Elon Musk wants to donate that $7 million,
absolutely, we would love to have Elon Musk on our side. Hopefully, he'll come around soon. He may already know, but
he may be listening to this. Who knows? Listener questions. Let's get through some of these. Yuan, James asks, what is the main objective right now in order to get capital D disclosure? And again, this might be a bit of a recap, but how are the funds being used for that purpose?
As I outlined earlier, it's a sequence of events that has to happen over the coming months. And job one is the UAP Disclosure Act and growing support within Congress. Real quick, I know there's a lot of people who felt dismayed after the UAP Disclosure Act version 1 didn't pass last year. And then we had months where nothing seemed to be happening. And then the Arrow report came out, and that was the Pentagon trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And people I saw on social media and comments and out there were feeling very discouraged. But I want to point out that actually it's pretty remarkable that we've had UAP legislation included in the NDAA previously that passed, and other areas in Congress where over the last 3 years, there's been something passed every year. And if you don't follow the US Congress, you wouldn't necessarily know that things happen very slowly. It's very hard to get momentum on any topic. American politics is so divided. So there's actually been remarkable progress on the UAP topic in Congress over the last few years when you look at it. So, we're hopeful that this year will be different than last year for a number of factors, and that we can get the UAP Disclosure Act passed, and then that will lead to the subsequent efforts, as I described earlier.
I think in the past, the idea of the UFO topic being discussed in American politics at high levels would have been hard to believe. But especially from outside the US politics, the way it is presented, especially in the media, is more like a TV show than it is, based in reality, which is incredible. So at this point, why the hell not throw the UFO topic in there to be debated, to be picked over by high-level candidates and be used as a big, point of debate? Because I think at this point, folks are ready for it. So why not throw the caution to the wind? I still stick by it won't get mentioned in any of the campaign leading up to, the elections and whatnot. I can't see it being on the table, but maybe going forward.
Yeah, I definitely feel that the stigma around the topic is lifting, but it's still, to me, the most significant obstructing factor to making progress on this topic. And it's great that lawmakers they've rebranded UFOs as UAP. They're comfortable talking about it in terms of national security and airspace safety. It's the nuts and bolts side of the phenomenon and the phenomena. And that's, it's just one part of it, but it's how we're going to have leverage and pressure points to, get Congress interested. And then obviously they're smelling a cover up. They know that they're being lied to, and that's their duty is to have complete oversight over the executive branch. So that is one of the overarching primary goals, is to establish congressional oversight over the executive branch moving forward, and then to address, national security issues that are related to UAP, whether that's flight safety or what are we going to do about these unknown objects coming over sensitive military installations. Those are the two lanes that in Congress they're paying attention to, and where we can make progress going forward. I think.
The next question from Chase, I think we've sort of answered, but I'm going to expand on it. So it was, with whistleblowers being so crucial to the overall case, is some of the funding being used to provide security and or protection for them? Now, you've mentioned that that would be the plan. I wonder, can you comment on so far, has there been plans to use any funds that you have for anyone in the immediacy?
Right. As I mentioned before, in the near term, I believe that what's going to happen is that significant and important whistleblowers who are ready to come forward, who now do not trust Arrow and want to take their information somewhere, are likely going to take that information to Congress or other avenues. And these won't be whistleblowers that will be coming out on public interviews like Grush did last year, or testifying before Congress the next time there's a hearing. There are going to be whistleblowers who are going to be very much behind the scenes initially, as Grush was. And so we're positioning ourselves with our resources to be able to help facilitate that type of activity, as well as in the future when there's the need for more public appearances, or when more whistleblowers are ready to come public and it's the right time for that to happen. We're going to be positioned to do that as well. And we want to, in addition to, we're not a law firm, so we're not going to provide legal support directly ourselves, but we're going to facilitate that. We want to be able to match up, potential whistleblowers with legal representation, and whether it's pro bono or we might need to help pay for that, we'll address that as it happens moving forward. And then we also want to provide public relations and media relations support for any whistleblowers in the future who do go public, so that when these people who've been working in the shadows for their entire career decide they want to come forward, their lives are going to be turned upside down with reporters calling and all this attention on them. We want to be able to support them with help. How do they handle that, and facilitate things like travel expenses to be able to fly to DC to be able to attend a public hearing. Just basically provide all the supportive resources, and we will. When that happens, we will be as transparent as we can with how we've, used our resources for that.
I'm going to ask you on that to expand. So that's a delicate line to traverse, that transparency when you have whistleblower X who comes forward behind the scenes and is speaking to folks behind the scenes in skiffs, private briefings. They don't want to go public. They don't want to come forward. They have approached you, or you've approached them to offer that support. You've given them, pick a number, $10,000 from that fund to facilitate legal representation, accommodation costs, whatever that might be. How do you foresee letting folks know who have donated that money's been used for that reason without giving away details that would, be detrimental to the person who's used it?
Right. In those situations, I think we would be able to report to our supporters that we've used X amount of resources for core whistleblower support, without providing details that could compromise the whistleblower themselves, or we could potentially demonstrate, be transparent as possible and say X amount went to travel, X amount went to legal representation, so that we're being transparent about how the resources are spent. But yes, at a very sensitive level, we're obviously not going to be able to give away certain details.
Yeah, and I'm thinking from the side of the heavy skeptics, which you will have seen in this topic already, who no matter what happens will find a negative way to spin something. And a broken clock's right twice a day, unless it's digital. But these folks look for any negative, and you use $10,000. The next thing, we've got journalists or others online who are reporting that Yuan and Matt are off to Hawaii for a week and they've used $10,000 of Disclosure Fund money. So I get that's going to be a delicate line to be walked along the way. But it's good to know that folks are going to find out the money's being used as best you can for the right reasons in the background.
Sure. Yeah. If Matt and I go off to Hawaii so I can teach him how to surf, we won't be using UAP Disclosure Fund money. I can assure everybody that.
No, I can totally
Okay.
imagine. Matt's got plenty of his own, I'm sure. I don't know what Matt's got. Hi to Matt if he's listening to this. Dave Smethurst asks, what does Yuan make of the emergence of civilian UAP bodies and what they are doing now? As part of that, he asks, where you think the UAP Disclosure Fund fits into that whole picture of civilian-led disclosure efforts in the future.
Yeah, I think by civilian-led efforts, they mean other nonprofits in the space and other organizations and groups.
Yeah, I'm guessing taking it away from the governments, even organisations. I'm presuming Dave means like the New Paradigm Institute, where you've got Danny Sheehan and co and that sort of thing. Yeah,
non-governmental organizations.
Yeah.
So I think that we're at a place in the topic where we don't need less organizations and efforts working on this. We need more, and that's one of the reasons that Gary Nolan was excited about coming on board the project. I can share is that while the Soul Foundation, which he founded, is the academic scientific level think tank sort of organization, the UAP Disclosure Fund, we're going to be more of the boots on the ground, getting things done in political advocacy and working directly with members of Congress to support perhaps the actual policies that an organization like the Soul Foundation recommends to governments. So so far, I think with the organizations that are operating in the space, there's a nice dispersion of what they're working on. Everything from science on one end all the way to direct political action on the other. So I think that I think we're just at the beginning as well. I think we're going to see over the next year or two even more groups coming online. And it just imagine or compare it to something like climate change or gun control or any of these other big issues that societies have been faced with. There are some key leaders and thought leaders and groups who stand out, but there are lots of other organizations who pop up and work on specific aspects of the issue and the problem and try and find where they can get something accomplished.
No, thanks for that. Skeptical Believer asked a few questions, but I'm going to pick one of them. After Luis Elizondo's book comes out, there may be a large increase in whistleblowers reaching out to the UAP Disclosure Fund. Have you prepared for that contingency? Are you ready for that?
Certainly, yeah. We're preparing for that. We have to, it's one of these scenarios where we don't know for sure how many people are going to come forward and when they're going to come forward. So our thinking right now is that we're lining up and relationship building with legal resources. And I think that, we're going to be in a position, like I said before, to help with supportive costs. But the real key will be how can we help facilitate legal representation for 1 or 10 whistleblowers who need it moving forward. So I'm confident that we'll be able to find a way to help. And the exact timing of that is what remains to be seen.
You've obviously spoken with Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Gary Nolan. Are you concerned about, I don't know if your own safety is the right way of phrasing it, but given what these whistleblowers are up against, and I can only begin to imagine the pressures that come on a David Grush coming forward and the ways he gets intimidated, threatened. We've heard about direct threats against his life. Have you ever considered that for getting so involved in this in the way that you're planning on doing it? Has that been a concern of yours? And have you ever had anyone reach out to warn you off of that?
It's certainly, being involved in a topic the way that I am now and just getting started and being involved at this level. Certainly we know that we're doing work that is getting the attention of the gatekeepers and the small group of people, I believe, within the United States government who have been able to keep this under wraps and keep things from the American public for decades now. So the resources at their disposal, and you could throw in private aerospace and other companies. There's a lot of resources. It's definitely a David versus Goliath story right now. But I feel that this is, in my opinion, this is such important work for American democracy. We we are facing a situation where Congress has not been given proper oversight over the executive branch, and billions of dollars have likely been spent on programs that they have no awareness of, the ramifications of which are huge, right, for humanity as a whole and for our government. So, I'm passionate about this, and I haven't had any kind of warnings or threats from anybody within the government. So I'm confident that we can. There are enough people and enough lawmakers and enough momentum on the side of demanding the truth and getting to the truth that I think we'll be fine all working together on this.
I hope at least that Lou's given you an early copy of his book.
I'm as in the dark as everybody else. I know that there's been some activity about something being online, but
yeah,
I'm personally I'm really looking forward to reading the book for the first time, on my couch and reading the hard copy. And so yeah, I haven't. I'm waiting for the release date to do that.
yeah. I stayed away from the leak as well. I saw there was stuff online, and I'd rather just watch the. If I was really looking forward to a movie coming out, the next one, I suppose, Deadpool versus Wolverine. If I knew the first 20 minutes were online, as excited as I am to see that, and if it's going to rejuvenate the MCU, I wouldn't go and watch it. I'll wait until I can go and watch the full movie, and the
Exactly.
quality it's meant to be and all that kind of stuff as well. So,
Yeah.
finish off with a couple of questions from Christian. He asks, firstly, the phenomenon seems to operate just underneath the line where your average Joe can ignore it. Do you think the phenomenon is heading towards some sort of climax where it may impact our daily lives? I ask because there does seem to be an uptick, but I could be wrong.
I wish I had the answer to that question, but I do agree with the premise that there is an uptick in activity. I think, those who who are very familiar with some of the things that aren't, that are on a more classified level, have suggested to me that yes, there is an uptick, and I think people's iPhone videos and other videos have been taken. It's posted online every day. I'm sure a certain amount of that is unreliable and false, but I think a certain percentage are real videos being posted. So I think that it definitely seems like there's an increase in activity, and you could say in significance. So who knows where it's headed, but I think it's not going away. It's the phenomenon is real. It's not going away, which is all the more reason why we need to not, as a species, we need to not look the other way. We need to confront this and be aware of what's happening, and so we can figure out what's going on moving forward.
And I think this is a nice question to finish off with, especially given you're newer to the UFO topic. Like you're a post 2017 baby at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have sympathy for the secrecy? Christian himself says he struggles with it, especially the stigma. There's no excuse for that, but when I consider 8 billion people and how this would affect everyone, it's complicated.
Oh, it's very complicated. I personally feel like I can understand how the secrecy started in the late 40s, when sightings around the United States and the world started to happen at a much larger scale. Right, the modern UFO era, when it was the beginning of the Cold War, and our government didn't know what these were. Was it Russian? Even if it's not Russian, could the Russians exploit us? We now have amazing insight into what our government was thinking in the 40s and 50s because of declassified documents. And those really point to the fact that early on they knew that this was a phenomenon that was unexplainable and needed to be taken seriously. And when a government doesn't have answers, that's the worst position the government can be in. So I can understand why everything was shuffled under the cloak of secrecy of probably the Department of Energy and the Atomic Energy Act, and why it was easier. And there was a fear that there could be a mass panic if people started to get too concerned about UFOs. So from a governmental standpoint, I can see why the secrecy started. But then what happened, I believe, is that the secret has festered over all this time. And there have been, it's gotten to the point where it appears that there have been, private aerospace companies and defense contractors who may have profited off of this technology without anybody knowing, and that's taxpayer dollars. So I can understand how the secret started, but it's high time that the secrecy end to a degree. I'm going to acknowledge that there could be aspects of technologies where the specifics for national security reasons might need to be kept secret, but the very fact that there are these materials potentially, or we're dealing with a non-human intelligence, should not be kept secret by a handful of unelected individuals within our government. I believe that to my core. And when it comes to disclosure and how that might affect the world at large, I don't have wonderful answers to that either. I think that I personally feel like humanity could handle it. I think it's something that we're ready for right now, as opposed to maybe 50 or 60 years ago. But I think it could definitely cause a lot of disruption. There's a potential for that, and that's one of the reasons why this phased disclosure approach, I think, has a chance of A, working, and B, having the stakeholders involved in this whole process, whether they're on the lawful congressional side or the previously hidden private sector side. I think that doing this in a phased approach is our best chance to start to untangle this mess.
So I'm going to add one more question from myself. If cocktail party question, I asked you before I met you in 2015. We're in a business networking, and you ask about UFOs. So you're at a cocktail party now. It's 2024. Your best tuck's on, and one of your friends comes up to you and says, "You're involved in this UFO thing now, aren't you?" And you mentioned the Disclosure Fund, and they go, "Aliens, UFOs. Like, do you believe in all that?" And they ask you, "What do you think it is?" What would you say?
In 2015,
No, now I'm asking.
Oh, now? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I am convinced that we're dealing with non-human intelligence, and I believe David Grush when he testified before Congress that biologics have been recovered. We talk about disclosure with a big D, and I think everybody imagines it as a presidential Oval Office address where he gets, or the press room where he gets in front of the microphone and announces, "Folks, we're dealing with a non-human intelligence." But I think what we've seen over the last 24 months or even few years, it started with Lou and Christopher Mellon. We've seen a soft disclosure starting to happen. And when David Grush testified before Congress last year, it really took it to the level of, I believe, disclosure. Now, for me, the credentials of somebody like David Grush or a person like Colonel Carl Nell, they are national security officials who have worked in protecting our country and worked on, in their roles for their entire careers. And they're coming, forward, and Grush in particular, under oath. If he was lying about anything, he would go to prison. What would their motivation be for just, doing this at the end of their careers to make something up and chase a rumor, or for that matter, Senator Chuck Schumer and the other senators? So for me, I've seen a form of disclosure, and I want the facts just as much as everybody else. I want to get to the bottom of this, but I personally I've crossed the evidentiary threshold. So I believe that we are dealing with a real phenomenon, a cover-up, and what's been covered up appears to be retrieved craft and biologics.
I like to give my guests the final word on the podcast, Yuan. So I'm going to hand it over to you as a final pitch, if you want to call it that, for folks. How can they find information on the UAP Disclosure Fund? Why should they be looking to support, donate, and just get involved?
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure being here, Andrew, and thanks for having me. And to everybody out there, I would just encourage you to support us moving forward. And we are going to be updating our website and providing information about our forthcoming campaigns. And then we'll be announcing on social media as we launch these efforts over the coming months. So if we can rally together to continue to support Congress and make our voices heard about how important this UAP legislation that's now coming up into the NDA is, I think that'll be the important thing that we can do for the remainder of the year. So we just ask for everybody's support. And there are other efforts in the space, and support everybody. We're working side by side with the other nonprofits in this space. I just want to make that clear as well.
Full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify, just search That UFO Podcast Premium, YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Funk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.